Oh, you muted yourself.
All right. Evening, everybody. Welcome back. We've got our second roundtable this month. We're going to revisit a presentation that we provided a few weeks ago about fleets, the new train for Colorado work set that Greater Denver Transit provided. We are going to have a follow-up on it tonight. We're going to talk about, as advocates, right, how we talk about fleets when we talk about new corridors that are going to be brought online for passenger service in Colorado, Utah, other mountain states, how we talk about the vehicles themselves and the experience, and kind of all the moving pieces in between kind of the idea of a concept and hopefully going to be supporting a future for the Mountain West, where we do have a lot more intercity passenger rail. So we'll start with introductions. My name is James. I am with Greater Denver Transit. Grassroots advocacy based in Denver. Denver is behind me, even though you can't see it. Connor, you want to go next?
The Off-Grid Urbanist. I'm Connor. I'm out in the Arkansas River Valley in western Fremont County, just about a mile away from the Tennessee Pass line.
Terrific. And Noah?
Yeah, my name's Noah. I'm an engineer and conductor for a Class 1 freight railroad in Colorado, currently living on the western slope. I do not speak for the railroads, and I'm just an employee. I do not have any of the insider info, so please don't ask. I'm a member of ColaRail, GDT, and the Western Rail Coalition, so I guess my expertise is more on the heavy rail side.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific. Well, happy to have you guys and looking forward to this conversation. So basically what happened is that I've had the honor to present this information at a couple different forums. The first was for a mayor's event up in Boulder County. Since then, we've also presented for a couple industry groups. Unfortunately, most recently, we did not have very good Wi-Fi. So we got to do a re-record, which is available on the Greater Denver Transit channel. If you go onto the live videos, you can see there was in earlier January a video called New Train for Colorado. We'll be talking about here. So I think just to kind of set the tone, we're not going to revisit the entire presentation, but just to kind of fly through what the topics that we discussed are, is especially for a really, let's say for a non-rail initiated audience, we wanted to kind of go into what are the options and basic train configurations if you were to try to really dumb it down, right? Understanding that, broadly speaking, passenger rail is really broken into two groups between locomotive hauled, which is the traditional motive power, where you've got a prime mover, a locomotive pulling a consist of coaches, then multiple units with distributed power. We discussed some of the pros and cons, some of the strengths and weaknesses of each make. Locomotives being very widely prevalent, easy to acquire. Unfortunately, they do come with cons in terms of being a little bit heavier. They take a little bit longer to accelerate and slow down. And then also their dead space. So when you have very limited or short platforms, right, because these locomotives carry passengers, right, you can't use that part of the platform for revenue service. We talked about multiple units, strengths and weaknesses of these, that they're kind of the global standard outside of North America. The challenge is that they're a little bit less flexible in terms of extending or shortening them. The sets are usually semi-permanently coupled. We talked about as well the issue where if there is some sort of incident or collision, say a tree falls and the nose gets damaged, depending on the extent of the damage, you can have a little bit more downtime when you've got a multiple unit. We talked about the recent innovations with power sources, is that today there are more modular train designs that allow you to sub and out motive power, where effectively this is a particular kind of train that Stadler makes, where you can buy it as a diesel multiple unit, where you have diesel engines that over time, if you get the budget for battery chemistry gets better, there's perhaps a hydrogen supply chain that is built up. There are options to upgrade incrementally as time, infrastructure, and budget allows. Talked about how the landscape in the United States is very different now than it was, even 50 years ago. That really there are no United States companies that are headquartered in the U.S. that are building intercity passenger rail equipment at scale. Overwhelmingly, right? We are talking about three European manufacturers that have localized products to the U.S. market that fits the requirements of the FRPR. We did a quick primer on kind of operating around freight trains, the requirements, and kind of what it takes to set up a partnership with a Class 1 freight railroad in particular that's going to work for their needs, usually as the overwhelming majority, not even just majority, 99% of the track mileage in the United States and North America is owned by a Class 1 freight railroad. Understanding what the tension points and the pain points are in the past so that we can inform ourselves, right? Whatever infrastructure we're proposing is going to be something that can be added to the freight right-of-way, the freight infrastructure that we're sharing in order to spin up a service if we are going to be using tracks that are owned by a freight railroad. We did a kind of a deep dive on platform heights. What are the challenges in terms of the basic infrastructure of the Western United States, how it differs from the East Coast, what the various floor heights of passenger specs are out there. There are unfortunately 3 that we get to work with, and that we've been narrowing kind of down in terms of high floor of the East Coast. That's becoming kind of the standard for intercity equipment that Amtrak has adopted. Talked about the low floor trains, the very kind of commuter configuration of the Western United States, especially in places where there haven't historically been those kind of intercity trains, right? We're talking about kind of commuter trains back from the 70s through 2000s that mainly operated within a metro area to the suburbs to usually the city center area. We talked about the very long distance legacy fleet that Amtrak has, the challenges that they've had in upgrading and kind of refleeting for contemporary equipment. We talked about the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and the accessibility considerations for fleets. And then we're going to probably spend a little bit more time on this subject on a roundtable is some of the reasons why people should be excited about intercity trains, right? Especially for those who are less experienced with it, who are more familiar with the clinical interiors of commuter trains, all the creature comforts, seating configurations, making sure that you've got the structure inside and the layout to have luggage. We're going to talk about some of the nuances in Colorado, Utah, the unique needs. Food and beverage. One of the more fun things about traveling by train between cities is the ability to enjoy a coffee or a beer, depending on your preference and perhaps time of day. Cabin ambiance, just how a lot of times intercity equipment is a lot more, it's a lot prettier. It's a lot more pleasant to sit in. We talked about stations and the station configuration, some of the issues and kind of lower expectations a lot of us have in North America for what our stations look like versus what a lot of folks who live in Northeast Asia or Europe are used to as basics for them. Kind of how perhaps there are some lessons that we can adapt from some of these places for a more thriving intercity passenger rail sequence. And also some of the unique opportunities we have to embrace bits of our history, preserve them, and also reinvest in them that some of the historical passenger rail hubs of previous centuries we could potentially have as the focal point when we reactivate those beautiful historic structures for contemporary new neighborhoods that can sprout from well-planned intercity passenger rail projects. So we'll dive all back into this, the networks. But I think, Connor, let's start with you, because I know that you've been having some conversations recently with some folks who are very much not rail initiated. And when you were speaking with them about fleet, when you were helping them kind of visualize what new trains meant and what they could look like, what were some of the things that you found yourself spending more time on that they were interested in that you think would kind of be good to kind of set the tone for this conversation?
Well, for the most part, Americans are pretty much rail illiterate. We've kind of bred it out of our society since the 1960s. So people will have typically 3 reference points for rail. If they're with the times, they'll know about Amtrak and usually have some choice words to describe both the quality of service and the rider experience. That you're riding in equipment that most of which, at least for us out in Colorado, most of this equipment was manufactured in the previous millennium and has been kept on life support. So they're used to the very dated, aged equipment. Then you have an entire group of people who only associate rolling stock with heritage railways, whether they be steam powered or diesel powered. So a lot of the equipment they see, varying levels of appearance, I would say, because not all heritage railways are equally funded. I would say, like, for example, in Canyon City, we actually have one of the nicest, most consistent sets of historic rolling stock operating, where it actually looks like it's meant to be together. But if you look around the country, you'll see some heritage railways, especially back in the eastern part of the country, where none of the cars match. It's a hodgepodge of whatever they could get. And that's kind of a long-term symptom of the fact that a lot of this rail equipment has just been scrapped over the years. So, you have some heritage railways that literally are, grasping at straws, trying to get 4 or 5 cars together, don't care where they came from, don't care if they're decades apart. It's all that they can get. So there's the heritage railway of like, oh yeah, a hodgepodge of mismatched coaches that all look like they were built pre-World War II. And then you have people who think exclusively in like commuter rail terms, like if they've been on RTD or they've been on the New York subway, if they've been up in the Chicago Metro, and they always reference, kind of either like the stainless steel, very rugged and used interiors of like New York City subway trains, or maybe the light rail of Salt Lake City or Denver, and it's all kind of this very 1980s, 1990s, still quite dated interior. And when you bring up things like, in Europe, they have cafe cars, they have lounge cars, they have Wi-Fi. It's like, whoa, what does a train look like that has been built this century that wasn't done for the cheapest bidder? And that's when you have a huge opportunity to explain, and what images worth 1,000 words. You show them what trains in Japan and Europe, Southeast Asia, even India, and parts of Africa, and how the rest of the world's just kind of left us behind, and they continued to innovate in rail technology while we threw everything behind cars. And we basically, a lot of our rail fleets kind of are still kind of stuck in a 1960s, 1970s, very robust, but very Spartan design. So there's a huge world to expose these people to when you start talking about what current equipment is available.
Noah, how about yourself? I think obviously spending a lot of time on the Western Slope, you're a lot further away from RTD. Kind of, how do you think people conceive of inner city rails? Mostly Amtrak, or do you hear anything else?
Yeah, I mean, sort of like Connor said, I think most people's perception of rail is going to be an Amtrak train. I mean, that's all that we have out here. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of that older equipment, service that's not necessarily the best in customer service. I don't want to bash any of the Amtrak employees. A lot of them are fantastic, but it is a government-run organization that doesn't necessarily customer service is not their strong suit. And obviously, the Western equipment is getting quite old. Most of them were built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and it is time. They have been refreshed multiple times, but it is time. Mechanically, it's time for some new equipment. And yeah, I think they're showing their age. The amenities are sort of behind. The restrooms are dated and just not what you would expect from sort of a modern, clean atmosphere of anything that you would find even outside of transportation. Obviously, the ADA is not really there, especially on the double deck equipment. They are doing a great job of rebuilding a lot of the cars to have like ADA bathrooms and sort of more modern thing that you would expect. You see on a lot of the new equipment, but yeah, certainly a little dated, functional, but a little dated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've also seen this with the kind of the Northeast corridor, which is the favorite child. A lot of the new equipment they've gotten has been following a lot of trends that American railroads have been following, where it's like, oh, we're going to mirror what you see on the airlines, and like that's not necessarily a good thing to mirror, but it's like, oh, it's going to be an airline style cabin, like with Brightline, for example, down in Florida. That's an average thing, but oh, it'll feel like a plane on the inside. It'll look similar. And to an extent, it's like, well, that's not being cramped together, seats to seats to seats, it's again, that very sterile, very Spartan, minimalist approach, which is functional and has a place, especially when capacity is concerned, but not necessarily the most welcoming or pleasant.
And the unfortunate thing, of course, is the Amfleet cars that are used or that are being replaced finally on the East Coast. They were built in the 60s and 70s. They were actually designed like an airplane. They were like, oh, we love the round body and the small windows. And like that is such a 60s and 70s idea. That's like we're so far beyond that. Like let's actually use the benefits of rail to get people on the train.
Yeah. Bombardier does make planes, or they did. I mean, I think Bombardier has been bought out and bankrupt so many times. I don't even know who they are anymore, but they were the ones who originally built those, and they came from a background of building planes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I spent a good amount of time during my college years. I went to undergrad in DC, so I spent a good amount of time on the Northeast Corridor, and it really was a world of difference, kind of going from like the regional trains that had those Amfleets, they kind of look like tin cans right on the outside, and then you'd get into an Acela, and this is, I'm talking about the older high-speed train Acela that's being phased out right now. Those were introduced in the year 2000, and even just between that, you could tell that there was a century's difference. So we're showing a picture here of Brightline. This is a Brightline train. This is not a true high-speed train, right? I think you guys would agree with that. When you talk to train people, there's arguments about what counts as truly high-speed and what's
by
not.
American standards, it's quite quick.
It does hit 125 miles an hour, which is technically high speed.
Mm-hmm.
So then, yes, so it is a high-speed train, high speed, but it has sections of high speed, so that definitely counts if it's 125. And I would say that this is about as comfortable of an inner city car as I think most Americans have seen, right? Is that the windows are pretty big. The seats are pretty, comfortable. You've got multiple shades of leather, right? It's not like a subway bench, right? This is definitely not RTD with the vinyl seats on the buttons and stuff like that, right? You do have a table to enjoy if you have a meal or you have a laptop or something like that, right? So I do think that like this experience here, it's certainly not, I don't know if this is perfect. I think you can find examples in other countries, right, that we would say has more of an elegant looking interior, and we can talk about that. But I think if you expose somebody to this, especially if this, if you went from kind of the Amtrak long distance superliner experience to this, I think people would recognize that, yeah, it does feel in a positive way.
Yeah, it's kind of the same difference you'd expect between a city bus and a coach bus. Fewer seating per linear foot of cab, and typically softer, more comfortable seating with a fold-down table, or in this case, a full table. I think the tables on this train could be a bit bigger, enough to at least have two laptops back-to-back on opposite sides, but they're moving in the right direction.
And I will say for the Amtrak Superliner cars, I really do, although they are aging, I really do appreciate their ride quality, and they are actually very quiet on the inside. And I think, that's something that hopefully the new cars will be able to match on. In Denver, we're sort of used to the RTD commuter cars, and they were built a little more fiberglass and flat interior. Yes, very functional, but not necessarily, ride quality and enjoyable on the inside. And I wish they did have more sound, proofing. And of course, the vinyl seats are not super comfortable, but at least to match or exceed the Amtrak Superliners, then we're going to have a fantastic piece of equipment.
It's one of the things that I think it's more subtle, right? That I think if you talk to someone who's not rail initiated, there's a sense of awareness of like, am I in a nice space or am I not? Right? They may not know why it's nice because they haven't had enough experiences to compare it to other train experiences, right? But they'll have a sense of like, I'm in a bubble, I'm in a public bubble, but it's a nice public bubble. And one of the things that I've tried to, explaining this right to someone who's like working for a transportation department, a DOT somewhere, who's on a budget, who's considering, cutting amenities, who are considering really, really, bare bones types of equipment, infrastructure and stuff like that. And one of the things I think that we've got challenge, particularly in the Western US, is that a lot of people, right, are coming from car culture, right? And they're coming from a private bubble, right? Maybe their car is an expensive mess, but it's theirs, right? It's their bubble. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that if someone is going to, like, especially do a park and ride somewhere, right? They're going to park their car, get on a train, right? They're going to be sacrificing their private bubble for a public bubble, right? We got to make it a nice bubble, right? If we're going to be expecting people to put up with it over a long period of time. How do you think about that, Connor? As far as I know, obviously you're very much a critic of the car industry, as am I. Kind of how do you translate the private bubble to public bubble thoughts?
Well, for me, it's more of a matter of, fumbling at the finish line here. We know that these rail projects take decades to get moving and are very expensive just to get the rights to run the trains and to get the operating expenses, the insurance, get public buy-in. And the last thing you want to do is, get, a fantastic train with regards to speed and comfortable ride, and have a good schedule, good frequency, a useful service, and then cheap out on the interior. It's just kind of like, some people might say, it's a minor, insignificant thing. But at the same time, it's like, if you get all those other steps out of the way, and then people like, it feels cramped, I don't want to use this. It's just like, come on, you tripped across the finish line kind of deal. So please don't fumble it at the last minute when so much effort and work has gone into even bringing any rail service back to the U.S.
It's one of the interesting things of, like, the configuration of the inside of the car is actually something that local agencies actually have a lot of influence and control over. Right? Is that one of the things that we talked about in the New Train for Colorado webinar, is that basically we only have 3 manufacturers, right? But of the manufacturers, similar to kind of like if you buy an airplane and you're an airline, right? The internal configuration of where the seats go, right? Whether or not you have kind of these areas that are separated by pane glass and vestibules and some of that infrastructure and the soundproofing is somewhat optional. Like, one of the things that you'll notice when you compare, there's a similar train that runs in California, the Caltrain KISS, the new trains that are being introduced for the commuter service up there. They've got a very similar cousin that runs in Europe, but the one that runs in Europe has vestibules with glass that close, that kind of dampen the noise. And that was something that in California, where they're looking at a commuter equipment, they chose to not do that extra expense, that they didn't feel like they needed to, shell out for that as part of their budget. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, right, is that, like, I think part of this is that there's a lot to be, I think, forgiven if we're talking about acquiring like a used fleet get started, right? If we're going to lease something used, we want to just get something moving. I think there's a lot of, understanding people would have, like, okay, we just want to get going. We'll get what's out there. What can we get quickly? But I do think that there is probably some skepticism and some scrutiny that should be levied on, okay, if we're going to buy something, right? Making sure that it's nice.
Yeah. If you are to try to use that public goodwill and, be square with your constituents, or be square with your voting base, whoever is supporting this train, be like, okay, we really want to bring you service, and we don't want to have a, 3-year lead time on a manufacturer being what prevents you from using this service now, especially if you want to build those good habits. And as long as you can be transparent, say, hey, we got some equipment, not the best, but we're getting you your service started while we're waiting for the good stuff to get here. That good stuff better be good when it comes, because you kind of made a deal. There's a social contract there with the voting public of, we got you your train first. It's not the best, but we're going to improve upon it, and we're going to get you the better stuff. And don't have that, don't go back anywhere and be like, well, actually it's cheaper to run this stuff, and we canceled the new stuff, and you guys are stuck with this. Ha ha. Yeah, that's how you destroy confidence in your system.
Absolutely. And, like, that's the big trade-off, of course, for the agencies making the decision, is that generally the more comfortable it is, the harder it is to clean and maintain. Our RTD went with the smooth vinyl seats because they're easy to clean. And I do appreciate that, but at some point, you have to just strike that balance of, the comfort and the maintenance and cleaning and all that. And I think the newer Amtrak seats do a pretty good job of balancing that. I have not been in a seat for more than like 2 hours, so I can't really say like if you can sleep in it, but they seem, good enough, I would say.
Yeah, but this is America. We can't have nice things.
Well, hopefully that logic is changing, right? As the demographic of people who care about trains is, different, right? I think
Well, just
for a
people
long
care about
time,
public spaces.
yeah. Well, I just think for a long time there was the challenge of there was just I think public zeitgeist, right? There was just a belief that rail was declining, right? Through the
Mhm.
second half of the 20th century, right? People were, planes were getting cheaper, cars were getting better for a while, right? Kind of
Mhm.
trains were kind of an afterthought, I think, in a lot of people. And what we're seeing now, right, is that actually, well, we probably bet too much and we were a little bit myopic in building road infrastructure and highway infrastructure, right? And now we're going to be playing quite a bit of catch up to
Mhm.
rebuild, right, the spine of, what is the spine in a lot of other countries for transportation systems and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But there is going to be the salesy part, right, is that we need to make sure that we're creating an experience that people will willingly say, okay, well, maybe it's going to take a bit longer, but this is more comfortable, right? That I'd rather be in this bubble moving than be stuck in my car in traffic or, awaiting I-70 reopen, or something like that.
Mhm. And that's where if you are going to have a longer trip, it's really important that it's comfortable and that you are making a bit of a compromise where like my stress level's lower, my personal liability is lower. I know I'm going to keep my schedule. I am not leaving it up to fate or chance to get to my destination on time based upon a weather event or a traffic accident. So that's always a compromise where you're trading time for comfort, and we hope that you're trading time for comfort and maybe a slightly less expensive trip from A to B. So when we're looking at the map about where you're going in here, there are different sections where, yeah, it needs to be quick, it needs to be competitive. Maybe the interior isn't so important. Like for example, on very dense commuter lines where you're only going to be on the train for a matter of minutes. But then on those longer distance routes where you really are replacing a long distance car trip with a long distance train trip, you want to be able to enjoy the ride and the ride quality, the noise, the ability to get some work done or get some play done, whether you're watching a movie or listening to music or sleeping or reading a book, and just being able to find that personal space in a public space and enjoy yourself.
So maybe let's pivot for a second then, right? As I think there's a lot of agreement for us about the interior amenities, what good trains are like, what train experience is fun, right? And what makes it fun. I
Mm-hmm.
think, right, when we go back to what's available and what's out there, I think one of the interesting things, just from a market standpoint, right, is overwhelmingly Siemens, which is a picture of the train manufacturer that made this train here. They have basically created what is appearing to become the standard for intercity passenger rail equipment, because Amtrak, who is the national operator, in the United States, right, they're adopting these trains not just for the Northeast corridor, right, but also for state-sponsored Midwest routes, the Pacific Northwest, parts of California, right. So I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is that I think we've got a pretty good understanding of what Siemens offers in an intercity configuration, right? But as far as I know, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, both Alstom and Stadler, right, the two competitors, when you ignore high-speed trains, which is very different from what we're talking about today, both of them have only really manufactured commuter equipment so far.
Well, Stadler, it seems like they're branching out into more regional equipment for what they're developing for Scandinavia, and the Nordics up there. They're building trains that are almost poised to take over a lot of their long distance operations, especially when they're building these multiple units that are 7 cars long. They're kind of pushing the upper limit of what you've seen in multiple units, but most people wouldn't be quite aware of that because they don't even know what a multiple unit is. Um, as far as Alstom goes, they do have some of the more interesting locomotive options that would be quite useful if we build the right infrastructure for them. But the actual rolling stock for them, that's a different question altogether. At that point, you can kind of mix and match whatever you want.
So maybe Connor, it would be now's maybe a good time. Do you want to explain like just bi-mode people, or if someone was maybe you're talking to an environmentalist, right? Someone who's maybe not really into trains, but they're deeply concerned about the environment, right?
Or
I think
noise.
we all know even diesel trains, right, are more efficient than cars. But
Oh, yeah.
how would you articulate for them, like, if they're going to ask you, well, are our trains going to run on electricity? And the answer is maybe,
Sometimes.
kind of depends on where you are, right?
Yeah.
How would you talk about that?
So dual mode trains typically imply that there is an onboard power source, typically powered by diesel, and a pickup, which can either be a third rail pickup or a pantograph. Now, in the modern era, things are pivoting more towards pantograph. So a
You
dual
want
mode
what a pantograph
locomotive.
is?
What was that?
You want to explain what a pantograph is?
So a pantograph is a apparatus located on the top of the locomotive, which extends a contact, typically made out of graphite, which is an electrical conductor that is quite durable, to essentially push it up against and maintain pressure on an overhead wire. So it's skidding along the wire while also maintaining a electrical connection that can support hundreds of kilowatts. So it's no small piece of equipment. It's an electrical pickup on top of a locomotive that brings power into the locomotive that then runs its prime mover. Well, in this case, not the prime mover. The prime mover would be like a diesel engine, but the actual traction motors below. And then the circuit is completed by the ground of the circuit being the actual rails themselves. So the wire is energized. The rails are not, even though the rails complete the circuit. So dual mode locomotives are able to pick up electricity from an overhead wire, use it on board to propel themselves. And while they're doing that as a dual mode, they have the ability to switch between the overhead power or the onboard power. Now, traditionally, dual mode meant that you had a diesel engine on board, and then you had the ability to pull power from either that third rail or that pantograph. But now we're seeing dual mode vehicles, which are more like charging in motion, where that diesel engine is now replaced with a battery pack, so they can run on their battery for a set amount of range. And then once they get under the wires, they then switch all of the locomotion to the overhead wire, while also trickle charging, quote unquote, the battery. About trickle charging, it might still be in the tens of kilowatts. It's nothing small. But dual mode locomotives give you flexibility. They allow you to use existing infrastructure and cut fuel expenses, because typically the running the electric motors on electric overhead wires will reduce overall locomotive maintenance by reducing the number of hours you put onto the diesel engine that is the alternative power supply. The locomotive will be quieter, and of course there are no local emissions. Of course, that power is generated elsewhere, hopefully by a hydro plant, nuclear plant, wind turbine, or solar farm. But even if it was produced by burning coal, due to the economies of scale of the electrical grid, the power being delivered by that overhead wire is arguably much cleaner than the power being produced locally by its diesel engine.
So I think one of the things that makes it attractive to a lot of people is, okay, well, if you can do battery, then just do that, right? But one of the things that I think we've run into when we've looked at this technology, at least of the manufacturers out there, right? There are some serious limitations that you have with range with battery. Maybe you or Noah, one of you guys want to talk about kind of the range considerations and what's practical. Let me pull up a map of Colorado here to have this part of the conversation.
Better make that a 3D map.
I can grab this one. I mean, same with electric vehicles that's happening right now. Same thing with the rail industry, that batteries just aren't where they need to be in terms of capacity to, be able to take a train as far as it would, on one tank of diesel fuel. And then of course you have charging time and the charging capability. Like Connor was saying, it's a lot of power. We're talking like a freight locomotive would have something in the like 3 to 8 megawatt hour capacity, which is the capacity for like a small town. And so that sort of, to be able to charge that quickly is going to take a lot of grid infrastructure. On the passenger side, things can be a little bit smaller. I think a good example is that Metra has a plan to convert some of their F40 locomotives into battery powered units, and they're looking at
Who is Metra, by the way, for people who don't know?
what up? Oh, you cut out.
Who is Metra for anyone who doesn't know?
Oh, Metra is the commuter rail operator for the Chicago region. And they say that their locomotives will last all day. Of course, their trains don't really run all day. It's sort of a very much a traditional commuter frequency of a lot of trains inbound to Chicago in the morning and a lot outbound in the evening. So typically, most trains are only going to do maybe 4 round trips a day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. So that, their longer lines are, I'm not super familiar with it, but the longer lines are maybe in the range of 50 miles. So it's not a whole lot of range, but they're not sure if the, battery locomotives will have that capacity. So we're still talking like the same with the freight locomotive that Wabtec produced the prototype for that BNSF was testing. At full capacity, you're not running for much more than 30 minutes and less than an hour. So it's not, they just aren't there. Obviously they can get there, but I think you need to see the capacity increased by like a factor of 10. And of course that's not going into the the environmental problems with batteries. Lithium ion batteries are consumable. They will have to be trashed or recycled at some point. They won't be usable. And, obviously we're still figuring that out nationally. And so, a lot of batteries is not going to help the environmental concerns there. In Colorado specifically, even Front Range Rail, which technically doesn't run into the mountains, although the South Line will have an elevation gain of about 2,000 feet. So that's not mountains for Colorado. That's mountains for a lot of other places. Just going to Winter Park, we have an elevation gain of 4,000 feet. So although battery locomotives do have the capabilities of recharging, through regenerative braking while going downhill, the problem is specifically just between Denver and Winter Park, getting up and over the Continental Divide and, through the Moffat Tunnel on that route. It is straight uphill for 42 miles. It is steep uphill for 42 miles. It is uphill for about 50 miles. So, you're going full bore for 2 hours. And even on a passenger train, that is just not possible yet. So we need, if you wanted to go with like a battery or electric unit, it would have to be some sort of hybrid. Like we are still relying on diesel power within Colorado.
Yeah. I do like the hybrid units, whether it be the hybrid consist where you've got a battery locomotive and a diesel locomotive, mostly because that way each locomotive is simpler. Or if you want to combine both of them into one unit, well, then you're trying to squeeze a diesel engine and a battery pack into a very small package. But just that regenerative braking, because right now, for those who don't know, pretty much all locomotives have what normally you'd call regenerative braking. It's called dynamic braking. The only reason why I wouldn't call it truly regenerative braking is because they bleed off the power they generate by running the traction motors backwards as generators through a massive resistor bank. So they just, it's a big space heater for the environment. Not great when you, especially when you burned a bunch of precious diesel to convert, that potential energy from chemical energy into elevation. And now you're on top of the Continental Divide and all this energy and you burn it off as heat. If you had a battery hybrid electric mode consist or battery electric hybrid locomotive, ideally you could recover some of that energy. Typically you can recover about 30% of your energy from regenerative braking, true regenerative braking, by recharging your battery. So at least all that precious energy doesn't go to waste. You can recover some of it to be used later.
Yeah, and obviously, like you said, depending on the location and the route, the BNSF concept where they're using the Wabtec unit, that I think that's what you're sort of referring to with the hybrid consist where they're running 2 or 3 diesel engines with one battery powered locomotive. That could work really well on undulating terrain where you're kind of doing a lot of little ups and downs and you're not really gaining a whole lot of elevation, through the whole route from end to end. And, going back to the Metra thing, that works pretty well for Metra because their trains are doing a lot of stopping and starting, and they don't really go up and down many hills. I think Illinois is pretty flat. So, certainly there's a lot of places that'll work. In Colorado, the Front Range, north and south, are quite undulating. Like I said, it's 2,000 feet of gain going south, so that might also be a little problematic. But we're on the cusp of it could work for us on the Front Range. Mountain Rail, we're still a long way off.
Yeah, but that's why the dual mode locomotive is useful when you have existing electrical infrastructure of essentially as soon as you are under the wires, you idle back the diesel, if not cut it entirely. Knowing what I know about powertrains, odds are you just idle it back to where it's effectively consuming next to no fuel, because it's easier to do that than it is to start and stop the engine frequently. But, the emissions of the locomotive will drop dramatically, even if there still are some emissions from the idling diesel while it switches to over wire or overhead power.
Yeah, I mean, they will be able to shut off entirely. I mean, our current locomotives start and stop themselves automatically when they're idling. So that'd be easy to do. It'll just monitor how hot it is, if they can make sure it can start up again.
And the dual modes that are offered by both Siemens as well as Alstom, right? Because we've got pretty good visibility to those in North America, right? Both of those are able to switch over between diesel and electric power at speed. But I guess kind of, when we talk about mode, a lot of times, at least over the last 5 years, I feel like people have been citing hydrogen a bit more often now. One of the cool opportunities I had was actually to go down and actually ride when the hydrogen Stoutler Flirt units that are going to be sent to California, that have been sent to California, were being tested there. We got to ride them, and it was a really cool experience. The trains were very smooth. But with hydrogen, there's a lot of really big considerations for the supply chain of hydrogen, of like where the hydrogen comes from, how far it's been transported, how it's made, right? And whether or not you really have that distribution infrastructure. So maybe, Connor, do you want to talk about kind of hydrogen and, go through a little bit about kind of the places that it might be a bit more viable and perhaps why? I think you've been a bit of a skeptic with hydrogen in Colorado. Kind of where are the pain points or where are the limitations with hydrogen about why perhaps Colorado might be a tougher road?
Okay. So the thing about hydrogen is that there's actually kind of a color code index. Has anyone ever heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to see if I can find something real quick here. There we go.
Brown, there's pink, there's blue, and there's green.
Yeah, I'm grabbing something real quick here to see if I can open this up and show everyone this. All right, so where's a good one? Okay, there we go. Okay, good, I got one. All right, let me just share this image real quick. I got one. Okay, so there we go. Can you allow me to share this?
Sure can.
Okay. That resolution is horrible. Wow, they lied to me.
I mean, I'm
going to remove this image.
I can plug it in later in the edit.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We are not in the greatest of times for different types of it used to be so easy to grab stuff off the internet, and now it's all crap. Okay. Let's try this one. This should help explain the colors so people have a visual reference. Let's try this one instead. There we go. That'll work. That's clear as mud. So hydrogen has many different sources it can come from. And there's pink hydrogen, which is from nuclear power, and green hydrogen. And those are pretty much the only good hydrogens, because even the naturally occurring hydrogen that typically is hydrogen leaking out of the ground from some kind of decay, and it's just hard to capture. But all the other hydrogens, either from fossil fuels, whether you're using the fossil fuel to generate electricity to run electrolysis, or if you're actually ripping the hydrogen off of fossil fuels in the same way how coal has its own category, that you can rip it off of, or a large majority of our hydrogen, industrial hydrogen, is actually made from methane pyrolysis, where we basically rip the hydrogens off of methane, and then the carbon is just a byproduct. Hopefully, in some processes, it is sequestered, but the cheaper processes, they basically rip the hydrogen off of the methane and then bond oxygen to the carbon in the process and produce a lot of CO2. So if hydrogen is a byproduct of an existing industrial process, that's great. But typically, the best hydrogens are pink hydrogen and green hydrogen. So hydrogen as an idea to replace fossil fuels has been around for a long time. The efficiency is not great. The round trip efficiency of hydrogen typically is between like 20 and 30% on a good day. It can be worse than that, especially if you account where it came from. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the longevity of hydrogen, mostly to do with the buildup of renewables, how there's things like the duck curve, which basically imply that we are producing way more solar power than we need, and we are not building battery capacity fast enough to capture all of our solar, and having an industrial electrolysis plant that can turn on and turn off when the grid has surplus renewables available, whether they be wind or solar, where you can convert that unused energy, because with renewable energy, it's a matter of use it or lose it. So if we can increase our green hydrogen production by just using it as a way to take advantage of power that's already there, that'd be great. And again, with nuclear, if we can ramp up our nuclear production of electricity, and then when the nuclear power plants don't really like to be throttled down, they can be throttled down, but it's not the most efficient way how to use the fuel. Once you get a nuclear reactor hot, it's kind of just good to let it rip. So in that case, if demand on the grid drops down, you just call up the hydrogen refinery and you tell them to go open up the taps and start making more hydrogen and store it in large vessels until it's ready to be used.
So just a really reality check, because the previous graph we were showing was not a pie chart. It just showed, what's out there. I think we need to have a little bit of a reality check on the hydrogen supply chain in North America.
It's not great. Hydrogen is not clean. It could be clean. It just isn't right now.
So here's the planned version of kind of what is hoped to become over time. And then production by methods, that was this, and then this is planned and online. So you actually layer in everything we have plus the pieces that are planned. We still have over 80% of the supply chain being gray.
Yeah, that's why
cool?
I'm cautiously optimistic that this will get better, but not holding my breath. At the same time, batteries are also not a great long-term solution, because we're just outsourcing our carbon footprint to third world countries to mine the materials.
So I guess one of the other considerations, right, is that during Biden administration, right, there was an infrastructure bill that put forward a whole bunch of money that planned hydrogen hubs. And one of the important things to remember, I think, for the Western, the mountain, the Western states, is that basically we don't have a hydrogen hub anywhere near Colorado or Utah, right? So I think kind of one of the other challenges is even in hypothetically, right, if there was hydrogen that was produced, green or blue or pink, right, it would still need to be shipped here, right? And the emissions from shipping the fuel here before people even started to use it, right? I imagine that would probably be another headwind from at least having this make economic sense, much less, environmental sense.
Yes, you'd hope it was shipped by rail, because the logistics of hydrogen pipelines are not great, and hydrogen on trucks is very silly as well, not to mention very dangerous. So rail is probably one of the few ways you could ship hydrogen, and you'd want to shorten those supply chains as much as possible. So it all comes back to you. If you want to have a hydrogen economy, you need to have a clean local source to produce it in the form of either green hydrogen from renewables or pink hydrogen from a nuclear reactor.
And in the application of, the trains, I think I want to point out, the hydrolysis method as they, as it pointed out in that first, wheel you showed, both the green method where it's developed from renewables, the black method for coal, and then is it gray for natural gas? All three of those, I believe, use the same process of hydrolysis. Yeah.
Not necessarily. There are certain processes where they chemically isolate the hydrogen from a fossil fuel. And then there's other processes where they're burning the fuel to generate electricity to run electrolysis.
Okay. And I believe that is coal, and definitely renewable. On the green is you are just burning it. You're burning the coal, and then you are producing electricity from solar or wind. And then you are just electrocuting water to pull out hydrogen gas. So you're generating the electricity anyway. So like in my mind, it's like, why not just put that electricity into the grid? Because it's about the same return on your energy investment. And so for the application of trains, it's like, in my head, I see it as better to make all the railroads electrified, run it off of a catenary, and then the power plants can be whatever we want them to be. They can be coal, they can be natural gas, they can be 100% renewable, whatever we want. And those plants is what we can change. And I think that
in an ideal world,
simplify everything.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's how if you can cut out the middleman of energy storage, because essentially hydrogen is energy storage. It's not a source of energy, it's just energy storage. The reason why hydrogen is popular is because it allows you to sidestep building a bunch of expensive overhead catenary and just go with these fuel cell trains and try to kind of engineer your way around the problem, when it's like the simple solution is overhead wires, but those have certain financial and social strings attached. A lot of Americans would raise hell if they saw catenary wires being run over their railroad lines because eyesore. And
would Americans care about that? I feel like unless it's in like a coastal area where you've got homes with billionaires and stuff like that, I don't know if anyone's going to complain about us electrifying a freight main in the desert.
Well, a freight main in the desert, but you try to electrify the Moffett subdivision, there's definitely going to be a couple billionaires throwing their weight around to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, I think the biggest issue that I see, because electrification of freight rail is a super interesting topic, and it's something I would love to see happen. I think the challenge is, and Noah, you've done some good research on this, is the cost to do that. The cost to even electrify, a handful of main lines, stuff like that. No, I recall it was pretty incredible. Are you able to talk about that a little bit of what you've read?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll try to keep it short. We should absolutely do a whole video on electrification, but yeah, absolutely. Back in, I believe it was the early 2000s, BNSF researched electrifying their busiest main lines, and I believe that was both the Northern and Southern Transcon. It amounted to, it was not like the whole network. I think it was even less than 50% of their track miles, and it was literally only the busiest main lines. And they came up with the number of about $20 billion just to do that. And when their whole revenue per year is $20 billion with a couple billion of profit, it is doable. They researched it, they were interested in it. But obviously for a private company, that is a lot of capital infrastructure. There's a lot of capital cost that you are paying out ahead of time that takes many, many years, possibly a decade or two to get your return back on. Mm-hmm. They basically concluded, yes, it is, going forward, like in the future, after you build it, it is, cheaper to run electric locomotives and maintain electric locomotives and everything, and, no more diesel fuel cost. But that initial investment is just so massive, and the debt you would incur is such a barrier to entry for any private operation that it would basically take some sort of government grant or government funding to get that done.
Yeah, it's a tricky subject because it's one of those things where like everyone knows it's the right move in the long term, but no one wants to be the first one to do it. And the funny thing is that they also know that in the long term it's going to pay itself off. I mean, it might take longer, but it will pay itself off. Especially if you're the first one to do it and you can, either dramatically cut your shipping costs to the customer or maintain the same price as everyone else while your operating expenses flatline. So I almost feel like it's a staring contest where they all know they need to do it, but they're just not willing to take that first move. And they know that the first to do it will reap the rewards first.
Well, I think this is, no, I agree with you. We should come back and make an entire video about electrification. But for anyone who's interested in this subject, Professor Tyler Dick from UT Austin did an amazing YouTube lecture on this, available on YouTube. You can also look at the slides here. This is what the topic was. This research was actually incorporated into a federal report that outlined, it was published the very, very end of 2024. That published basically like what the hurdles are and kind of what are the ways we could try to reduce the uncertainties to make an investment in freight electrification happen faster. So let's definitely get back to this, but it's definitely a really interesting topic because I would love it if the economics of this could change and we can make this happen a lot faster. But
yeah. But okay, we're kind of getting a bit deep in the weeds in the electrification. Can we kind of pivot back to some train interior stuff before we wrap up?
Sure.
All right. So I have some things I want to share here that I want to use to kind of entice some people and show what is possible. So I'm going to throw this image up on screen here if I can. So this is just kind of to get people in the right mindset of what we could do and where we are. So when we're talking about a new train for Colorado, we have to remember where we live. We live in a beautiful place. And if we don't get huge windows like this, we've done something horribly wrong. James, you recognize this train?
I do. I actually haven't ridden this, but I know the seats. I know the seat covers, the seat head covers. So this is in Switzerland.
Yes, it is. And, Colorado could become kind of like a Switzerland if we play our cards right. So what else do you guys like about this image here?
Can I add to it?
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to say. Yeah, we do have cars like that. Actually, we have cars that are government owned that are like that. On the Alaska Railroad, we have the Ultradome cars built by Colorado Railcar, U.S. Railcar, now Stadler. Or Stadler just built ones for Rocky Mountaineer, but same design.
So what you're saying is they're available.
They have been built. They're not technically available. I mean, Rocky Mountaineer made a small 10-unit order from Stadler. That was a couple of years ago, at least. But they could be made. They could be brought back again, and I absolutely love them. I can try to find a picture for you.
So yeah, they're out there. I think the issue that we would have is that the versions off the shelf, the design that was produced, I think is a little bit too tall for the Moffett, right? Or it was kind of very close. That it was basically there's some tunnel you have to adjust.
Correct. Yeah, for the Moffett Tunnel subdivision, through the majority of the tunnels there, they would be too tall. They're actually like right at the specification. They're about 18 foot 2 inches, and some of the previous versions were a little bit shorter, but I was told that Rocky Mountaineer approached Union Pacific about potentially realigning some of the track and some of the tunnels, and maybe even doing some rock work to clear the overhead clearance, but that has not been done. I think they would have made Rocky Mountaineer pay for it, and they were not prepared to do that. Yeah, but they did.
So not plug and play necessarily, right? But I mean, just because those particular double deckers, we can't run. I think to your point, Connor, there's plenty of examples of single deck trains that have gorgeous views. So is this the Glacier Express, I think, in Switzerland? I've been on this
Yes,
train.
it is. Mm-hmm. I also have a couple other images here showing what certain cafe interiors can be like if we really want to get crazy.
Well,
One
before
of which
we
actually
do that, there's one thing in this image that I just wish that there were some people who live in a certain town in the mountains who feel like the train is something that could be a risk or a problem for bike infrastructure. But I'd just like to show that in this image, you have a train and a bike path right next to it, and there's no problem.
Oh yeah, right of way is great, but yeah, trains and trails, or rails and trails, can coexist, especially if you're lazy and you want to not bike all the way up to the top of a certain pass. You can ride the train up there and bring your bike with you on the train, and then get off the train with your bike, and then hit the really interesting part of the trail. And then if you don't want to take the train, you can then ride your bike all the way back down the hill that the train pulled you up. And by hill, I mean like 3,000 feet of gain, maybe.
There's a certain audience of this video that will know exactly what hill we're talking about, but that is a whole other video in its own right. So is this the one you wanted next, Connor?
Oh yeah. So this is actually I don't think this is actually a rendering. I think this is actually an interior shot. So this is a real deal. What an inside of a cafe car can look like, and the cafe will be blended together with a bit of a lounge. You'll actually have a human behind the counter to serve you your cappuccino, and I'd like to see you squeeze this onto a bus. I don't think you can. And this is just the experience that we're trying to kind of reacquaint the American people with. If there's a more civilized way how to travel here. Actually, if you look at this, is GWR. This is an English train. By England, I mean that.
So yeah, Britain figured it out.
Oh yeah. English-speaking countries typically struggle with trains. And
so this looks old school.
This is a bit old school, but you could build old in the new. You could definitely build a themed car inside of modern equipment. And especially for certain parts of Colorado, that might appeal to a certain demographic. But you could put something like this inside of a modern piece of equipment. That's kind of what the Rocky Mountaineer does in certain parts. And still, I mean, hey, it might be dated, but this is classy.
There is someone behind this YouTube channel saying, "Okay, boomer."
Sure.
I mean, I was like, do you want me to
okay, go to my other image. This one's a bit more modern. There you go.
I was gonna say something that was contrary to your point of the interior shot of the Rocky Mountaineer cars, which are old cars that are made to look old but very classy because they've been rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
I can post those later.
Just their alternatives to sterile airline style seating.
It almost looks like a private jet, like someone would have this entire, yeah.
Well, but this is a lounge car. It's a public area. So these are just cool interior spaces that we could bring back into the public zeitgeist.
Yeah, well, I mean, this looks fairly bespoke, but I think the point is, really clear, is that this is not going to look at all like riding a commuter train somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And I think that with the type of routes that you'd be running in Colorado, especially up into the mountains, you'd have the demographic that would appreciate some of these higher amenities. As you know, your vacation doesn't start when you get out of your car at Vail. Your vacation can start when you get on the train and start enjoying yourself and looking at these beautiful views, not trying to stay alive on I-70.
So that I think that is kind of another brilliant layer. By the time that we are talking about trying to raise public money, more of a mountain experience, right? Is that, everybody who flies to Colorado through Denver Airport, right? They have to not just pay the tax of the plane flight, but they also got to pay the tax of I-70, right? And I-70s, when it works, the drive is fine and there's beautiful views, but imagine having another 2 hours of your vacation each way where you don't need to deal with mountain driving.
Mm-hmm. Especially depending on when you touch down, because if you're not familiar with the roads and you're trying to get to your hotel, in this little town called Avon on I-70. You have to drive pretty much all over the Continental Divide at night to enjoy the start of your morning ski vacation the next day. It can be quite the white knuckle ride and a really rough way to start your vacation. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the bus staying service and the snow staying service is so popular with routes like the Pegasus that go to a lot of these resorts along I-70, because many people, especially outside of Colorado, don't even want to deal with it. They'd rather trust a professional driver than take their own chances with a rental car.
Well, that's just kind of where also, I'm just trying to recall, I rode the Epic Mountain Express once, which is a van service provided by Bell Resorts, or it's affiliated some way. I remember getting in, and I would have it was pretty tight. I was seated next to two strangers, and the window was wrapped with that those stupid adhesive ad dots that you would use to see on TD vehicles that they just banned. So I had 2 hours, and it wasn't cheap, going all the way up to Vail. I couldn't see out the freaking window. And there was just kind of this realization of, yeah, it's great that I'm not driving, but I'd rather be on a bus, because at least with a bus, you have the higher ceiling, you have a full window, and hopefully they don't wrap it. But it's just, it's one of these things where, like, there are ways for us to get this right, but there's also ways for us to sabotage ourselves, right? Is that, like, there are for-profit, shuttle services, right, that have a huge advantage because, they have the scale, they're owned by the resort. You've got a total captive audience, and yet, it was a miserable experience. And anyone who does that, who I think gives bus staying a look, you're gonna be like, screw this. I'm just gonna ride the bus, because at least if I ride the bus, I can look out the window.
And I have taken the bus staying
at Epic Mountain at the Epic Shuttle.
I have taken the bus staying from Denver Union Station to Vail, and it was quite nice, quite beautiful. And the other thing you'll notice, especially if you're someone who's in Colorado and you drive I-70 frequently, is that if you take something like the bus staying, look out the window and you'll see things you've never seen before, because you're not trying, even in a modern passenger car, you're kind of limited in your ability to look up, because the windows are smaller. And when you have these larger windows, you can look way up the side of that mountain and see stuff you've never seen before. Also, you're not worrying about dying.
So just to like put this in context, right, is that there are buses where you can totally see outside. You can tell because there's just a black window. So this is an older bus. I think a lot of these are actually being phased out. But the new buses Mustang has, there literally is nothing covering any of the windows. You have completely unencumbered views. The buses are articulated, right? So it's actually a really smooth ride. I love Mustang, and I wish there was, here you can see this is what the new buses look like. They're sleek, right? And I wish there was more marketing for this. I wish that we had like more TV commercials where, and this Pegasus van kind of has the same problem as the Epic Shuttle, that they have a stupid wrap over the window, and hopefully they fix that. But I think one of the experiences that I'd love to see someday is having a train directly from the airport and getting to the mountains and the ski resorts of Colorado someday. Because that is just one of the things in terms of a experience we can sell that is plausible. Like, hey, you want a world-class experience from beginning to end on your vacation in Colorado. What better way would there to be just to fly into the airport, get your bags, hop on a train? You deal with nothing. You don't deal with Denver. You don't deal with I-70. You don't deal with any of that. And it's a straight shot all the way up through some of the most beautiful, the most beautiful environments. That's probably another video of like all the hurdles it would take, for us to get a direct train from the airport to the mountains. But
well, at least right now we could get a train to Steamboat, Beaver Creek, and Vail pretty easily. Well, even if you're right outside Vail down in Avon, that last little bus jaunt, that's not too bad.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the direct ride, but it's plausible. And if you kind of made it an experience, right, you set it up as an attraction in itself, right, that's absolutely worth considering. This is for a later video, but Noah here has thought through some really interesting ideas for what it could take if we did have a budget to, build some new infrastructure in the mountains, what we could do with that. But I think that's probably for another time.
And I do
So I
think
guess
we're
to take
living in
it
an
out.
interesting. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We are kind of living in an interesting era in which, if the car market hasn't reached maturity, it might even possibly be waning, because, as a lot of people have seen, cars getting more expensive, insurance is getting more expensive, and eventually all of that will arrive at the doorstep of the rental car agencies when their cost of procuring a fleet and insuring a fleet becomes so high that just renting a car at Denver will become more expensive than it is now. And it might even become a more luxurious offering, like, oh, I actually can afford to rent a car when I fly into Colorado. We're thinking like in a 2030s, 2040s context. I mean, please, if Detroit can remember how to build a cheap car, but I really don't think they can. And we've gone this so far in this direction of deindustrializing America, we'll never be able to return to building cheap cars again. So we're kind of stuck with, kind of mediocre cars at a 60, 80, $100,000 price point, and insurance rates that match the cost of replacement. So, we are kind of entering this era of the decline of the automobile, not even without rail being a competitor or not. And that'll make these conversations about different ways to get in the mountains even more relevant in the years to come.
Well, I think the broader, scarier problem that we all need to face is what can we build efficiently and cheaply today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we have to change about our education structure, planning and permitting, all sorts of stuff, right? If we're going to have cheaper, if this stuff infrastructure is going to get cheaper to build, we're going to have to change, a lot.
Well, it might not get cheaper to build, but it might be the thing that only has the best bang per buck. Compared to all the alternatives.
We have exhausted, I think, a lot of the alternatives. So I guess, Noah, for you, given that we are over the hour mark now, is there any kind of side of the fleet piece that you feel like we haven't addressed yet? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we start to wind down?
Did you want to get into like commuter versus inner city? And we kind of already touched on that.
We totally could. So this is a presentation that is being developed for a totally different audience.
Well, yeah, we can get into that on another video as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't know if there's anything that we had talked about before that would really mesh in. I mean, we already talked about seating and interior and all that junk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, just generally, right? This is how we'd explain it. I mean, this presentation that we're putting together lays out, right, what you actually use buses versus trains for, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of journeys, what kinds of demand necessitate a city bus versus a highway coach versus a light rail versus a commuter rail versus an intercity rail, right? I think kind of like what we were talking about earlier right now was that when you have a journey that's less than an hour, right, you don't prioritize the comfort and the interior configuration as much as you probably prioritize seating and space, right? You're trying to carry the largest amount of people you can quickly, to get to their job, right? Which is very different from, what we're showing here, right? When you have a train ride that lasts more than 2 hours, can be up to, 7 or 8 hours, right? You've got a completely different, set of demands, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What we call commuter rail in Denver, which is really more of like an urban or suburban rail system, where I believe the light rail may go over an hour in trip length on some of the longer lines, but at least the commuter rail doesn't get over an hour. And yeah, it is very much let's just get the capacity and pack people in as much as possible, get that speed. you're only going to be in there for maybe 30 minutes on average. I do wish they had plugs to charge your phone. That's one of my pet peeves with it. But and then I guess you level up to more of what we call traditional commuter slash like short inner city. And I'm sort of thinking of the front runner in the Salt Lake area where 88 miles total. It is sort of inner city, I guess, in the sense that it connects Provo, Salt Lake, and Ogden, and that it is what we would call commuter rail cars. But that has, they're a little more comfortable, I would say. They have the seats, and they have, bike capacity and luggage storage and things like that. They have restrooms on the, on each, I believe, on each car, at least one or two per train set. And I really liked them. And the one time I rode it without the group, I thought it's really nice to have a table in front of you, because even though I didn't even have a laptop, I just could like set my phone down and set my water down. It's amazing the little details, how much it can improve the experience. Even though I was only on it for like 20 minutes, it was just really nice, even just sitting at the station. I mean, I didn't really have to go anywhere. So I got on it early and just sitting in the station for like 10 minutes waiting to go. I'm just, it's a lot more relaxing and friendly when like you can set your hands down or set your phone down on that table. I wish RTD had them, but it makes sense why they don't, because that is a short system. But then, yes, I guess the next level would be getting into the longer inner city trips, sort of getting into Amtrak's long distance trains, or even some of their state supported trains. Like the Cascade service is a little bit over 300 miles in total from end to end. So, that is where you're getting into like multiple restrooms per car, and, both a cafe car and even possibly like a dining car, as Amtrak has on their longer distance trains. Yeah.
Yeah, true dining cars are cool. I just don't know if we're going to get those in Colorado. I mean, it'd be cool, right? But it would kind of be the edge of like we're planning a fleet that would probably take you to Salt Lake City, right? Like that's the kind of train that would have a dining car.
I don't know. I think that mountain rail up to Steamboat and possibly even Denver to Grand Junction during the right time of day would make a lot of sense to have one.
Yeah,
it might be a way to incentivize.
Yeah, like front range rail being that, in each direction, it's no more than 2 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Mostly more oriented towards commuters that you could have a cafe and some drinks, and some alcoholic drinks would be really nice.
Yeah. I'd like to see,
Yeah, diners, I would love to see on the ski train on the Winter Park Express, even though it's only a 2-hour trip, because it leaves in the morning and goes directly to the resort and then comes back in the late afternoon to evening. I think even though it's only 2 hours, that a dining car that serves breakfast in the morning and dinner in the evening, I think that would be fantastic, and that would be a huge draw. And certainly for the steamboat train being 6 hours, that it would make more sense, depending on the schedule, to do breakfast and lunch, or lunch and dinner as well.
Same thing going to Grand Junction. You're kind of at that same number of hours. And also, like with the ski train, the time of day is a huge part of this, where hopefully, Front Range Passenger Rail is running, multiple trains a day, where, you're kind of a cafe car that's a multi-use for snacks and coffee. But for the mountain rail, where you're probably looking at fewer trains per day, typically around breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it makes a lot of sense to offer those services too. And those are huge revenue makers.
Yeah,
I just want to acknowledge a comment. We just got a comment from Michael, and he said ski train definitely needs operate ski bar car. So I agree with that completely.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's only a 2-hour trip, but because of the, the type of trip and the type of people you have on it, it'd be such a draw and such a moneymaker to have that option on there.
And also that means you are able to get to the ski area with Winter Park Express and not immediately run into the cafe to get something to eat. You can just hit the slopes immediately and make more out of your ski pass that day.
For sure. I mean, I think the question would be like, what kind of dining are we imagining? Because like I know the Amtrak dining car is got like a full staff of like cooks and stuff, right? It's like they've got 3 or 4 people below decks putting the food together. They've got like 2 servers right upstairs. Now, do I have that broadly right? I've only done this like once or twice.
I mean, I've never seen the downstairs of the Superliner kitchen, but that feels about right. They may have up to 3 servers upstairs,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4.
So that's probably like a cost question, right? Is like, would that make sense? You know, would that improve the subsidy? Could we charge the right amount? I mean, that's probably a video in itself. We need to interview. I know who's got experience with that, because I've only imagined like a slightly higher version of a cafe car. Like I'd have imagined like we could have like what the Amtrak, Winter Park Express has. You've got cookies, cup noodles, coffee, like really, really basic stuff, but like hopefully really good beef stew or something like that. A little bit more hearty, something that's got more bread. Ideally, like figuring out how we can get a version of Amtrak that lets us have local food. Like how do we get that contract where we're not stuck with the national Amtrak menu and we can get something local? Because I feel like Amtrak Cascades may have something like that, where they've got at least some items that are local to the Pacific Northwest. So whatever contract we sign, I hope that is a consideration, because that would just be more fun to have like Colorado beer, have Colorado snacks. And stuff like that.
Well, they do have Colorado beer, but the irony is it is
Wow.
brewed in Coors and Golden and then shipped to Chicago, and then from Chicago, I believe it gets put on the Zephyr, and then it makes its way back to Denver along with everything else. But yeah, I think Amtrak used to do that back in the day. They had some local options, but in my mind, I would like to see both options on the train, and on mountain rail trains in the future, of both like a cafe car with like a quick grab and go beverages and some snacks and like a burrito. And then like a full service diner car is more of a premium option, where for breakfast, have sort of a normal, sit down breakfast, couple options. And then for dinner, I mean, you could do hamburgers, you could do a steak dinner, you have a couple options there, because people would definitely pay for it, and it would probably be cheaper than at the resort.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's closer to what they have in like Germany and Switzerland, right? Is that they don't have like a huge kitchen doing just, a restaurant, basically. What they do have is a bistro car, but they usually have maybe 2 people behind the counter, and they will serve like pastas and other stuff, right? It's going to be more robust than what Amtrak has. So maybe there is kind of like a happy medium in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you could do a lot with just 2 people behind a counter and a small grill and a small kitchen. You're not going to be making gourmet, but you can definitely make some hot breakfast food and hot, freshly made lunch and dinner as well. That's kind of what people are after. You don't have to go the full 5-star. We're not trying to put a Michelin restaurant on wheels here. We're just trying to have food that wasn't just microwaved to make it hot from a cafe. We're trying to get something a bit more freshly made.
I mean, if the people are willing to pay for it, I'll put as many Michelin stars as they need on the train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's a car thing. We can't have that. Michelin star was to get people to wear out their tires.
We might need to see if we can invite Thibaut to talk to us, France, or some of our European friends, to talk through what kind of food they think they get. Because just looking at like even on SBB in Switzerland, right, which has total credibility for quality, I still think a lot of their stuff is microwaved. Sorry if I'm missing. If I'm wrong, say so in the comments. But I do think that even in like Germany and Switzerland, quite a lot of their meals are microwave, but they're good. They're still good, because when they were frozen or when they were put in the fridge, they were good. So,
and
so yeah,
some of these options, especially with a longer distance train with multiple stops, if you have, depending on what your linger time is at a station, if you're able to run off the train real quick, grab something from a station adjacent cafe that's based on the ground, and then run back aboard, if that could be somewhat integrated in the plan where they know a train is coming, they know exactly when it's going to be there. You might even be able to, hey, we live in the 21st century. You might be able to order ahead of time on your phone and then be able to grab something that took maybe 10, 20 minutes to prepare from a station platform based restaurant, run off the train and then run back on and enjoy it. Hey, we could do something like that.
Start a business up in Fraser and for that to the people on the Zephyr or something.
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
if you could get a Zephyr mountain rail servable, basically we already have the technology. It's already Grubhub or DoorDash, whatever you want to call it. Just have station delivery, or you have the station itself have its own restaurant where they know exactly when the train's arriving. They can tell the cooks like, hey, you got 30 minutes, get those orders knocked out.
It seems like something that would be really easy to do with like a pizzeria, right? Like, making large amounts of food at scale, having a delivery, having them already kind of packaged to be delivered and stuff like that. It seems like that has got to be possible. Like
Well,
I feel like someone we know has done that at like Grand Junction, right? I feel like
in a more rail-oriented society, I think this would be a no-brainer. But even if it's something where the conductor goes out and grabs like a little trolley full of stuff, then basically like calls out like, hey, I got your stuff here. This is yours. That's yours. That's yours. Bam, bam, bam. Just slinging burritos and burgers left and right that people already picked up. Because, yeah, I admit the logistics of having a full staff kitchen on a train are expensive, but we don't have to have the kitchen and the staff on the train.
or have right, we'll have a modest kitchen, and that's probably what this is going to be. It's going to be some sort of middle ground, right? There'll be we'll have a more evolved version of the cafe, maybe have a second person, a smaller kitchen. They can have a slightly bigger menu, right? And then in addition to that, maybe there's some innovation, some Colorado specific stuff where like at Fraser or Glenwood or something like that, have some options and some local vendors, right, where through the train they will advertise an app or something like that where you can order stuff and pick it up. There's got to be a way to do that. Like you said, we're living in the 21st century.
Yeah, there's a lot of people like, oh, that could never be done. It's like your kid in kindergarten just ordered Taco Bell. It's the technology's here.
I feel like someone on our trip to Grand Junction did that. I thought like
someone on our trip to Grand Junction got off the train and didn't get back on the train in time and had to Uber to Glenwood Springs. No, usually the station stops aren't long enough to do that.
Well,
but all you have to do is the cafe car and/or diner, because I think you could have both options. They just have to make enough money, obviously, to pay for themselves. And sort of one of the ways you could look at it is, does that car make as much money as one of the coach cars? So instead of adding more coach cars, we just add on a dining car. And I have not been told the numbers exactly, but in general, I was told that the cafe car on the Winter Park Express roughly makes as much money as a full coach car when selling tickets. And that was back with the old pricing standards. So when it was a lot more expensive. So it for sure maybe doesn't make money. Obviously you're balancing that with it is an amenity, so it doesn't really have to make money as long as it's pulling people in. But, allegedly it makes money, and there's not that many options. And certainly I think if we increase the options, that would, like we're saying, just the pattern works out where people are having breakfast in the morning and dinner in the evening, and they would absolutely pay for that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And there's a huge option for you to coordinate with local vendors to be able to buy, say 50 burritos in advance from a nice place next to Union Station, bring them on board and kind of sell them on a first come, first served basis. We're out when we're out.
Yeah, it is such a shame we don't have that, because when large groups rent cars on the ski train on the Winter Park Express, a lot of them will bring their own food. I mean, we did have one company group that catered their own car, and they had I think it was still all sort of pre-packaged, but everybody made an order ahead of time, well before they got on the train, so they knew what to bring. And then they had two hosts that came around and kept you topped up on drinks, and I think they had appetizers and hors d'oeuvres and everything. I mean, it was a whole setup. But certainly it's can that not be an option that we just can't provide from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm with you on that. I mean, we're close to an hour and a half. Is this probably a good point to call it? Any final thoughts?
Build big windows.
Build big windows.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get
Have
some local
different
food.
seating options. Have a cool cafe car. It can be done.
It can be done.
Mhm.
And I think the good news is it seems like we're kind of moving in this direction. We're just going to make sure that we stick the landing and that whatever contracts get signed are good contracts.
Well, Mountain Rail will be a huge, interesting opportunity to see how this all actually pans out and see what we get.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, until next time, maybe next week, signing off. Take care and stay warm.
Oh, yeah, will do.
Thank you. Until next time.
Till
Take
next
care.
time. Build more trains.
Bye-bye.